How did you end up working in finance?
Um, so it's kind of interesting because I'm not actually like a finance professional, like long term. So I actually started as an accountant, like back in my very early days, like my very
I had no
first,
idea, actually. I did not know
yeah,
this.
well, my very first job when I was like a little baby 17-year-old, I didn't actually go to college. I went to night school. And so I was a full-time accountant during the day. And it was, I mean, I was 17, so mostly I was like doing like little old lady tax return type things, and not
Like personal accounting, like tax. Okay.
personal accounting, like working at like a not even big accounting firm doing personal accounting.
Yeah.
And so I started there, and then I was actually accounting wasn't for me, but then I switched to be. I was originally a math major, switched to be an econ major in my undergrad, and then I did a master's in finance, and that was way before my consulting career. And then I, became a management consultant. Forgot about finance, except for that you never really do when you're a consultant because you're always, um, you know, building models for different parts of the business, and that's fundamentally like a intersects with finance. And then, yeah, and then I kind of like fell a little bit back into it when I always worked in financial services when I was in consulting. So that was my area of concentration. And then when I went to my first executive role out of consulting, which was as the COO of Arcesium, I owned the finance function. So I had like
Mm.
an intense crash course in like 606 and like all of these other kind of like accounting um, pieces that I thought that I'd left behind, and then all of a sudden I would like I kind of had knew enough to be dangerous and was a finance professional. And then my next role after being a COO, owning the finance function, was a CFO, and so then I was a finance. So
Huh.
and since then I would say like um, I've just like expanded my repertoire because you do like a lot of things very at a very high level in consulting. So you'll like advise on like an M&A deal, but it will be 6 weeks. But now we actually like execute M&A deals. So now I'm like, okay, well now it's just like the more concentrated version, the operating version of like the things um that were just like advisory before.
Before it was play acting, and
Well,
now
I
you
mean,
do the
all of
thing.
consulting is play acting.
Right. Yeah, yeah. um, I
Does
also
everybody
feel like ASC
who
606.
know about your secret consulting background?
No, no. Uh,
Bain,
um,
Bain intern class of 2011.
my illustrious 3 month career.
Illustrious internship career.
Yeah. Um, I feel like ASC 606 is two things. There's like the long written documentation and like procedures and all of this stuff. And then there's the like Loch Ness monster version of it, which is like this like mythical thing that like rules all your life, but no one actually knows what it is. And like I heard there was a rule in there that says XYZ that will take over like 3 months of my working life type of ASC 606. Which one did you interact with? The like mythical uh, monster
Uh,
that will bite your head off, or the actual thing?
it was it was like a technical version. So the context was that we had just introduced all of this like implementation revenue, and we had to work out like what the right way to account for it was, and it was big. It was like a huge part of our revenue profile in general. So it was just about like how to implement 606 for that.
Very cool. Okay, so what's your job now?
Oh, so my official title is VP Finance and Strategy at Remote. Remote is a best way to describe it is like a global HR platform, but more specifically, the area of expertise is employer of record services. So that means we employ people on your behalf in countries that you don't have an entity in. So you want to hire someone in Spain, you don't have an entity in Spain. Basically, we do all of the things, the taxes, the employment agreement, paying you, making sure you get the right training. If there is kind of like mandatory trainings, and then you just show up to work, and it's basically like you work at Subscript, even though your employer is remote. So for most Americans, it's very similar to a PEO, but it is, instead of a co-employment, it is like the core employer is remote. In this case, it's not both remote and the employer themselves.
And
So
in
yeah, I
this
do
whole
that.
EOR,
It's called EOR.
and, what do you, I guess, which part of the machine do you make happen?
Yes. So
Or,
lots of parts of the machine, but so the finance component is primarily strategic finance. So the scope of that is the obvious things. So like your corporate finance, M&A, go-to-market finance. So we also run pricing in my area, as well as like standard FP&A budgeting, all of our board reporting, so cash flow, so everything normal strategic finance. It's very different to a regular strategic finance because we run a full shadow P&L, because our actual accounting is so complex, because by definition our business model has us having entities in every single country that we employ people in. So we have like
yeah,
90 plus entities that we have to do group accounting for, and then roll up to a
yeah,
consolidated. So that takes a while. So strategic finance does take a big role in just like the day-to-day P&L generation, so that we can kind of get ahead of
yeah,
that. And I also run strategy, which is more of like it's like a soft department. It's not a real department. It just means that I'm doing like all the strategic planning work. So think about it as like our version of OKRs, and then like
yeah,
aligning the investment case of what we want to spend our money on to the headcount plan to the OKRs, then setting up all of the like tracking and reporting and engagement on those to make sure like we're staying on track. So and then it's just, like the grab bag of other products that comes with like the amorphously titled executive. So
super cool. So I'm assuming your team is like remote. Are they across geographies, or are they mostly North America, or and do you have like people managing each of these entities things in country, or how do you, like, that sounds 90 entities, like, it just like boggles your mind and makes it kind of
yeah.
explode.
Well, so I'm based in New York, and my specific
Yeah.
direct team is in Paris, Zurich, and Austin. And then their
Yeah.
directs are as diverse, are in the UK, in Bulgaria, in Italy. So it's just like we're actually like quite Eurocentric. We originally were started by two co-founders, one from the Netherlands and one from Portugal. So that's kind of where the initial growth started. Plus, Europeans like totally get the idea of hiring in other countries, because you run into it really soon,
Yeah.
especially if you're doing knowledge work, because
Yeah.
the proximity might even mean that just over the border, whereas
Yeah.
it's still a little bit of like a novel concept to Americans, that they would want to hire somewhere else that isn't in America. So
Yeah.
that's where we started. And then in terms of like managing all of those entities, we have a lot of the actual company, like that's our work. Like that is what remote does. That's what our customers pay us for. So there's the very high level work of like managing just the existence of those entities and the filings and everything like that. But then all of the financial transactions associated with those entities as a result of employing people in those countries, like that is the job. So
Fair
working
enough.
directly with those tax authorities and money movement and everything like that is the kind of like and making sure we're compliant to their local laws, including
Yeah.
specifically related to what those people are doing in those countries. Because it's a big difference if you're employing someone who's a salesperson versus like a programmer versus customer service, because they all have their own rules about like whether you have to apply VAT to those services or things like that in countries. So it's extreme. The interesting thing about finance at remote is that it's massive. So we have like over 200 people, I think, in our finance team. One of them are accountants, just trying to
Yeah.
like close 90 plus legal entities, and then a ton of them are tax because they're doing
Yeah.
both tax for remote and tax for our customers, and the tax implications of their their employment in multiple countries of all of these different individuals, because they like, even though they're not actually doing the direct employee, they're still paying us, and that has like VAT implications, and like that means that they have certain like reporting obligations in their home country. So we manage all that as well, and we don't just do EOR. So we also have like kind of a smaller but similar apparatus for doing the same thing with contractors, so non full-time employees, and then
Yeah.
also direct employees. So we have a payroll business too.
And I imagine, like, in addition to 200 finance people, you probably have a bunch of like agencies and like professional services firms you work with and stuff like that, like in each of these countries, right? For like tax
Totally.
and I don't know,
We
compliance and all
actually,
that.
like, originally we were doing it mostly outsourced, but as we scaled, it made sense to bring it in house.
To do
So
more of it.
we're
Hmm.
going, like, some things obviously you'll never completely outsource, so like your audit and everything like that. But
Yeah.
but there's a lot of benefits to bringing just like more of like the day-to-day accounting and work in-house, especially if you're trying to close your books in 90 different places as soon as possible.
Yeah. Okay, so there's like delivering the core product of like the employment and the compliance and all of that. And then there's the fact that you have all these other products, and you as like the strategic function probably need to make sense of all of that to, like, I don't know, do planning and like goal setting and all of that. How do you like bring all the how do you manage all the different potential revenue streams here? I imagine it's even different by country and I don't know, all of these things.
Yeah, it's a lot of it is actually goes back to just having like good fundamental strategic planning. So it's around like, well, what is the super basic framework of like, okay, what's the mission of the company? What's the vision of the company? What are like the more medium term goals of the company in terms of not even necessarily like maybe high level in terms of revenue, but it's also in terms of like impact. And then you start to like break that down into some more kind of like short term objectives, and especially objectives that work together. So one of the key insights that we had at Remote is that what our customers need is not necessarily just the ability to hire somebody in a different country. They need a solution to manage their global workforce, and they need different types of solutions at different levels of maturity. So if we can get alignment on our target customer, we know what stuff they need, and then we build against that in that order, and then we can project our revenue, or like decide what our revenue target should be against that, decide what our investment needs to be against that. And then that's kind of like the model for strategic planning. So it sounds like there's a million options, but if you put it in the framework of like a pathway to a long-term plan, then
Yeah.
you're really just making decisions on the edges on an annual basis. It's like, okay, well, how much more do we want to invest in X versus Y this year, and then what kind of results do we expect out of that?
Hmm. I think the place where I was like imagining unimaginable complexity is like the multidimensional thing of like the segments of customers, the countries in which they're doing the billing, the services that they're buying, and then like even within segments, there's kind of like size, and there's probably the types of people they're employing, and
It's
like that's
interesting you
where
say
like my brain just breaks.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not actually, because you can kind of simplify the overall model to only being interested in customers that are doing global things. So if they essentially have to have an interest in, or have either actively already have like a significant global footprint, or be starting to
Yeah,
move in that direction, and it allows you to like
yeah,
massively simplify, because you can kind of like much more closely align like your sales motions with where those customers are and what they're looking for. So we actually think of it not in a super, you don't have to go super granular. We think of it in, as I mentioned before, like a different stages of customers. So we think of what is our proposition for like a company that is just hiring for the first time internationally, and then what's our proposition for a company like Subscript that's already like global by and remote by nature, and then what kinds of products do they need, and then in terms of like, then it's really about, okay, well, we just split up our go to market to meet that need, and it doesn't actually, like, you regionalize in the US and then you do some regionalization in Europe as well. And we also have an APAC presence, but yeah, it's we're very lucky actually, because we are still generating quite a lot of our business on inbound. So people self-nominate that they are of this profile, and then it's not that different, the thing they're buying, if they're in the UK or if they're in Finland or if they're in the US, because it's fundamentally like a service of employing somebody in a different country, or like meeting the regulations of a specific country for payroll or contractor management.
That makes a ton of sense. Okay.
It makes it a little bit like it kind of sounds like it might be like a little bit different to plan, because you're like, okay, well, if this customer comes in the door, do they always know exactly what they want? And the answer to that is like, not really. So sometimes they need to be pushed in a specific direction, but overall, we've still found that it makes sense to sell individual products to our customers. So we're not yet at the, like, buy the behemoth that is, I don't know, like a Workday or a does everything company. So we're still definitely at the stage where we're like, okay, well, the solution for you is this, and and then we can kind of plan against that.
Okay, so then there's like the planning and like simplifying enough to being able to plan, and then there's the simplifying even more to being able to communicate to the rest of the, I don't know, exec team / company that, like, here's how we're focused on and here's how we're doing. So how do you like, how do you figure out what the right metrics to look at are? Like, how do you even approach that problem?
Well, I'm going to be super basic and go back to the original framework, which is like, what are you trying to achieve long term? And then how do you measure those things? So when we think about what we're trying to achieve long term, it's really like, we want to help our customers across the entire value chain of engaging in their like global hiring management, like performance management, and paying, of course, their employees. And so for us, there's metrics that pop out of that. So there's like, obviously, your base financial metrics, but then there's things like, well, you're interested in like customer lifetime. You're interested in how many products they use. You're interested in how much they use those products. So you can kind of like take them as like the starting level, and then like then drill down into that. Okay, well, what specific type of like products do we think should be used together? And then that also can kind of create strategy in itself, because your metrics can drive, like, oh, in that case, we should price, if we want to encourage this behavior, we should price like this, or we should go to market like this, because that will get us to our like eventual goal of how we think our customers should interact with us. So in some ways, like, the interesting, I mean, obviously you're a founder, you know about founder-led businesses. The great thing about being a founder-led business is like a relentless focus on the thing that's 10 years in the future. So so it's, in that way, we can say like, we have this somewhat unchanging North Star, and then it's just a question of like, what's the best way to get to that.
It's pretty cool, because that's the only way you get to the thing 10 years in the future, right? Like, with an unrelenting focus, even though it seems kind of, I don't know, a winding path over the course of the 10 years.
Well, one of the pieces of advice that you gave me once when I was entrepreneuring was that the objective of entrepreneurship is not to actually try and work out how to roll the boulder up the mountain. It is to work out how to make the mountain flatter and the boulder smaller. And so you can think about this as being somewhat the same the same journey. It's like, okay, the North Star to some extent doesn't move, but you got to try and work out the path of least resistance to navigate to it.
Yeah. That's really cool. And I feel like that's like I never thought about the fact that your job as a finance and strategy person is so different because it's a founder-led business. Because I imagine, like, I don't know if you think of like a PE-owned like business that was similar in size and complexity and all that, your job could be quite different as a result
I think
if they
so.
were
Like,
like focused on the how do we flip this in 3 years instead.
totally. Like we are, and I genuinely believe this of all of kind of the startups I've worked at, even the ones that have been later stage, is like as soon as you start solving just for the finance part, you are actually going to lessen your effectiveness as a business because you have to have a goal that is actually about like changing a market or changing the way that something operates in order, because it's the goal has to be about the value creation. It can't be about the output of the numbers. So then if you've got the goal about the value creation for your customers, then it's you can start hanging a framework over like how do you measure that, and then like
Yeah.
cascade down from that your own goals. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, that I guess it does make the. I mean, I'm still doing all the basic stuff like projecting our burn and like building investment cases for where we should spend our money, but it all is within some kind of like shape.
Yeah. That's cool. Um, how does that change with the stage of the business?
It gets way well. So I think, I mean, you would definitely kind of know this when you're super early. It's well, firstly, it's less of an input output function. So especially if you're like working on the product market fit, you're not exactly sure what it's going to take to get to each of the milestones. So you're just kind of like trying to get it at different ways, but it's you can't do it in such a predictable way. So as you get to a later stage, like one of the things that is a really interesting experience for me at this stage is that when we know basically if you put, especially in our core product, if you put $1 in the machine, how much you're going to get out of it, how long that's going to take, how those customers are going to behave. So it just makes actual strategic planning like a much more like predictable exercise. And then you're really just building the question of like, okay, if there's additional products or bets that you're making, like those are the ones where it's more art, but you're really in the science zone for your core
Yeah.
business. So I think that changes a lot from being in the early stages, and it also makes it like a lot more predictable around like how you spend your money as well. Like what are your investment cases, and um, just even like mapping the core KPIs of the business is like you know where they're going, and
Yeah.
something weird has to happen to kind of dislodge them. Whereas it's, I
Yeah,
mean,
your error bars are just so much
yeah,
smaller
exactly,
on everything.
because I mean, you know this so well. Like when you're early, it's you'll be doing something and it will be giving you some result, and then that result will completely change. Um, and
Yeah.
it, yeah, so like the stabilization of the business model is like definitely one of the benefits from a planning perspective. But then I mean, the whole point is to
Yeah.
continue to destabilize it. So you like create the
Yeah.
stabilization, and then you're
In
like,
a
okay,
positive way.
in a positive way. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So you got to like,
Yeah.
um, if you can say, oh, I know this is going to be the result if I invest like $100 million in the sales function, then you're like, okay, but that means that now I need to spend $20 million trying to build the same motion for these 4 other products. And
Yeah.
that's going to have a much less predictable outcome. So I would still say that even at our stage, which is like a kind of like Series D ish, 80% of the plan is like predictable, and then the other 20% is like, guess, don't
Yeah.
know, what would we like it to be? What do we hope it to
Yeah.
be? Take 20% off that.
Yeah. Whereas for us, like 99 is unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you just have to be comfortable with that.
Yeah, for sure. But that's like your it's like I would say our founders are like past the um they're past the stage of like, is this initial thing going to work? And now they're
Right.
in the next stage of, as I said, like trying to stabilize it. Like, is this global HR platform completely changing the way people hire their global workforce? Is this new thing going to work? So it's just
Yeah.
the next level of like taking a flyer.
Yeah. It's a fun game. Um, uh, I'm trying to think about like the sort of I think a lot about like how you communicate metrics to like a company so that it's motivating and provides clarity and like helps people know where to focus and it aligns and all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering like how do you think about that as like kind of the owner of the metrics? How do you make sure that the rest like they have because there's like the owning the metrics and having them live in a spreadsheet that nobody looks at, and then there's the like owning the metrics and making sure that they're actually like a useful force in the company. And I'm curious how you think about that.
Well, I usually do not recommend business books because I think that they are often an idea that could be expressed in 10 sentences, but then there's 300 pages for no reason. But
You can't really sell a 10-page book, Sam. It's like people just won't buy that.
well, that's why blogs exist. You just write the blog, and then but then they write the book. Anyway, the point is, measure what matters is very good. It is the original book on OKRs, and but the point of it the point of it is around like how to like rally people around like very specific, and they've got to be like so um they've got to be super clear and understandable, and then it's got to be clear how everybody contributes to them, like what everybody's role in them is. I would say that for a company like Remote, where we also have this mission about like basically like bringing talent to the world, like building opportunity everywhere, uh, we have the added bonus from like a motivation perspective of like we can create metrics that show our journey to our mission. And even if they're just activity
Hmm.
metrics, that is an additional layer of kind of like why are we here, and like
Hmm.
what is the value that the company is creating, especially because I mean there is quite a lot of people at Remote who are there for the mission reasons of
Yeah.
it playing. We have this, for example, we have like Remote for refugees. So if you hire a refugee, you get like that you get that service for free. So
Yeah.
there's like a lot of places that it's kind of embedded in our story.
Yeah.
But the general kind of idea on the metrics, I would say, is like firstly they got to be like super aligned to like where you're investing in the company, so you can't have this like weird garbled message about like you're spending money over here but you're tracking this metric. So it's got to be super clear like where are you investing, where
Yeah.
like what how are these results kind of important to the company, and how does everybody play a role in them. So it's interesting that you focus on this communication part, because one of the other things that I have always done at the companies that I've worked at, and I do at Remote as well, is that I run the all hands. And that seems like
Hmm.
such a kind of like maybe it's like people think about it as admin task or anything, but for me it is like the most important moment that we have to communicate with
Yeah.
the company about what are people doing and what do we value and what's important, and how are different people around the company contributing to that. So like that for me is like one of the, from a communication perspective, like in addition to like we use the same tools as you do, Notion and Slack, but they can become what we call like, the Notion Ocean, and
Yeah.
Slack just you get lost in it. But if you can have these like touchstones, when you know that you're going to have the attention of the organization, now all hands is one of them, then you can kind of like use that as rallying, and then connecting them back to the mission and to your kind of like the annual goals that you've and the OKRs you've set up, or whatever you call them. We call them strategic rocks because
Sure.
as with many founders, the idea of OKRs is a little corporate. But like use those communication points to make them part of like the company culture and the company law.
Do you like start with those? Do you start with like, oh, here's the things you're tracking, like the three things or the one thing or whatever,
Oh
and like
yeah,
here's
no,
where we
like
are
and
now?
this, I'm also like fundamental communication principles, like repetition. Every
Yeah,
single time we get together, we talk
yeah,
about the 5 things that are important in the company. We talk about, we probably got like, I don't know, five or six metrics that we talk about in every single. In addition, like some of our big goals are things that you can put in a number, and some of them are
yeah.
more around um, like product releases or those like things that we're building. So we tend to tend to try and keep it like super consistent. Like we're always talking about the
Mm.
same goals and our progress against those goals, and then we're always talking about the same 5 numbers and our like trajectory on those numbers, and then everything is kind of like
Awesome.
built around that.
Yeah. Have you heard the phrase repetition doesn't spoil the prayer?
No.
I really like it. It's great. Because like I feel like people have this like idea that it should be everything should be novel and like
Oh, yeah.
you should like yeah, like don't get boring or whatever, but I feel like in like business I think it's actually the opposite. Like you want to be like just super repetitive because it's the only way you get anything across.
Totally agree. And then it's more just about like you can say the same thing in different ways. Like for example, we'll
Yeah,
have a like we have a big theme around our payroll product, and so
yeah,
we'll one week we'll have the sales team come and talk about like feedback from customers, and then the next week we'll have the product team talk about new releases. But it's payroll every single week, and like
yeah,
just like coming in it from different directions. So when people think, oh, how should I, because all you're trying to do even with OKRs is like basically distribute decision making power by giving people a framework to understand what they should be working on and what they should be doing.
right.
So as long as they can be like, oh, okay, payroll is the thing that we talk about at every all hands. So instead of building this feature or like working on this operational task, I should work on this one. Like that's the only way to like keep, especially a really big organization, um, like vaguely working in the same way, because you're already like we're already like over 1,500 people, so that
Yeah.
gets siloed. Like the information can get siloed like really quickly. So you've got to somehow work out a way to like package the very core things in a way that allow people who are like 8 levels down to know what to do.
Yeah, I like how you just tied that thread around why all hands is so important, right? Because it's like, on the one hand, you have that one thing where like the entire company is paying attention, but then you have like day to day of those 1,500 people, like I don't know, some very large portion of them are making either a small decision or a bigger decision of like, do I do X or Y? And the thing you did in all hands will make them make like you don't have to have a very high probability of them making a slightly better decision for it to all just pay back like amazingly
Yeah.
on that time.
And it's
Yeah,
interesting because we haven't used like some organizations use like a really structured way of like understanding what the teams at the very micro level are doing. So they say, oh, you have to
yeah,
have all of your goals in this like massive like goal planning structure, and they all have to like roll up. And we have been much more freeform about it. So we're like, um, here are the big things, self-organize around those things, and we are
yeah,
essentially not going to check your work. We're just going to see the output that you create, and
yeah,
like kind of go from there.
yeah, yeah. You're checking the work, but not the intermediate work.
Yeah, exactly. We check the, it's like we expect the outcomes to be aligned to the goals, but we're not saying like show me your math, you know.
Yeah, totally. Um, you talked like, this has come up repeatedly in terms of figuring out where to spend resources and like which things to pursue. And I feel like it's like a very hard thing, especially for people like me, especially for uh, people like me who get sort of whose eyes get greedy about like, oh, maybe we should do X and Y and Z, and like we don't like really process opportunity cost very well. And I'm curious, like, it seems like you have like pretty rigorous ways of thinking about this, and I presume you probably force others to think about this before they go willy nilly and do a bunch of shit that like is not going to be, it was not the best way to spend time or money or I don't know, other resources. Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts.
So I think, I mean, every single founder that I've worked with is kind of the same from this perspective, which is that their the vision is so like they want to kind of do everything at once, and like the eyes are bigger than the stomach type situation. And one of the things that has worked for us at Remote is um, trying to put time periods on things. So, and that, like, it's like prioritization around all of these big goals. So a great example of this recently, which is related to our kind of our internal work, is that we eventually we want to have a product for payroll that is so good that it's better than every domestic payroll in every single country. Like that is the goal. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it should be better. Like in the US, if you're a small company, Remote should be better than Gusto, for example. But
Yeah.
and then you apply the same logic in every single country around the world, and that is you could easily go down all of these individual threads about making all of these domestic products and not go back to the core idea, which is like you have this target customer who's globally distributed, and they don't actually need that. They don't need
Mm.
the best local product ever. What they need is something that works across all of these geographies. So the way that we've kind of balanced this at Remote is said like, okay, well, let's think about these in terms of time horizons. So our current target customer time horizon is that we want to serve you early on your global journey, and we want to serve you as you go deeper into your global journey. But then the next frontier of that is actually serving customers that aren't even on a global journey that have these
Mm-hmm.
domestic needs. And so it's
Mm.
kind of a question of more like, because that's how the maturity of the product will develop. But so we just kind of talk about it as like, we do want to have an amazing domestic product, but that's like a not yet. So we like try and put it
Mm.
into like, okay, how do we meet these different like kind of like customer needs over time, but try and like kind of concentrate our focus on the one customer? Because I think that one of the things that is super super critical, especially as you start going from a single to a multi-product company, is you have to work out how to get like how to create value for that single customer, because your
Mm.
economics do not work if you're reinventing the way that you serve every time you create a new product. So you have to be like, okay, well, this is a customer that is underserved and needs these things, and let me just like super super focus on that until I've managed to deliver on some depth of what they need, and then I can start thinking about what the next evolution of my product is going to look like.
That's such a good point. I see like a lot of folks saying like, "Oh, my product does X," and like Y is like fairly close to X, so maybe we should do Y too. Completely ignoring the fact that X appeals to like one segment of their potential
Exactly.
universe, and Y appeals to a completely different segment.
Yeah, because that's, I mean, one of the other things about having this like go to market at scale too is like the cost of experimentation is a lot higher if you're trying to do it with like a big sales team.
Yeah.
So we, by like being aligned on like a target customer, you can get them to operate in a predictable way, and then you don't have you don't have like a lot of like channel conflict and these kinds of things
Yeah.
when salespeople are doing too much experimentation on their own, like like
Yeah.
creating the like a clear idea of like where they're supposed to be fishing. It's not only gets you like that more consistent outcomes, but then you can kind of like use it as part of your strategy as you expand like what you're offering to that customer.
Totally makes sense. I know we're pretty much at time, but wanted to ask if there's any. Uh, I mean, I hate getting this question, so we can cut it out if you don't want to answer it. But I wanted to ask if you have any last thoughts before we end.
I guess the thought that I have is around like we've actually talked almost this like I am a finance professional, but we have talked almost nothing about finance this whole session.
It's true.
And the I guess that one of the themes I guess I wanted to bring out is like what I think companies really need, and it doesn't have to come from the finance function, but it often does, is like this idea of like if you have even if you have fundamentally excellent functional leaders, at some stage you have to mash all of the things that they're doing together into like a super clear idea of like what the company's striving for, what the priorities are, and how you're going to deploy your resources. And if finance takes that role, that can be like super powerful to actually ending up with like the financial outcomes that you want, along with the strategic outcomes you want. So I guess my my ask of finance professionals is to start thinking about strategic planning as not just an exercise of budgets, but an exercise of like a broader exercise of like what should the company be targeting, not just what the revenue line should be or how much we should spend or how much we should burn. And you will actually get a much higher quality financial plan, and you'll also be able to manage it better throughout the year
Yeah.
because you'll be able to link it back directly to your strategic objectives.
Yeah. Like the whole exercise to be a should be a how do we achieve our overall vision, not how do we get like the P&L to tie up.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Or
Yeah.
not how do we hit some arbitrary number of revenue. It's like that the revenue should be an expression of like where you are on your journey of like whatever the company is trying to achieve.
Amazing.
Very woo
That's
woo,
such a
but
good thought to end it.
I've just been in Arizona at a spa, so I'm like feeling woo woo today. So this is all like philosophical thoughts from Sam Wanning.
Oh, I was gonna say your tan looks nice. Um, um, yeah, this is awesome. I think it was such a great last thought to end on. So thanks for doing this interview with me.
No sweat. I hope it has been interesting, and
Yeah,
thank you
for sure.
for your thoughts also.